A number of others said, we don't need those beds. How wrong they were. How right we were. The hospital system, as you know, is in disaster at the present time. And much of this affects African-American males who have AIDS. So therefore, we have learned the lesson that we must speak up louder and protest even more strongly. Our protests only kept the hospital open another 3 months. We should have kept it open forever. In addition of which, the 100 Black Men was the catalyst, along with the Coalition for a Just New York, in developing the campaign to get a black chancellor. It was Tom Minter in 1983. We did not win at that time, but we set the stage, which led to the recognition by everyone that there should be a black chancellor, led to the presence of Dr. Richard Green, the late Dr. Green, who provided tremendous inspiration and leadership for our system and was just beginning to move ahead at the time of his unfortunate death. We have already asserted ourselves that the next chancellor should be an African American. We have had some influence in some of the decisions of recent days. In fact, the 100 Black Men is an organization that has a reputation, has a network, has a heritage of support for African American youth. Most recently, our conference on the survival of the black male highlighted the fact that none of us are doing enough. Even when we come to conferences and we analyze and we look at the statistics, none of us are doing enough. We're only doing enough when we're going out there one-on-one and in groups, working with black males, helping them to develop their self-image, keeping them off of crack and drugs, getting them to respect their women, getting them to understand that we will overcome only if we mobilize ourselves. We cannot look above, we cannot look below, we cannot look to the white man. We have to look to ourselves. And that is what the 100 Black Men is about. That is what this conference is about. And I am very pleased that Tom and Leo invited me to come to share these few words with you, because inspiration, support, and leadership is what we ought to be about. Thank you very much, and good luck in your deliberations today.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Brown. Okay, next we'll have special remarks from Mr. Tony Fitzhugh from the National Urban League.
I'm pleased this morning to bring greetings from the National Urban League. We want to thank Dr. Corby and Dr. Edwards for inviting the Urban League to participate in this important meeting. We've just returned recently from our own conference in New Orleans, where over 200 educators, academicians, and service providers met for 3 days to talk about manhood and fatherhood, adolescent responsibility in African American families. So I'm really happy that you invited me here today, not just because I'm a Southerner and the name Medgar Evers will always ring a bell of freedom and dignity in my heart, but because the issue of black male survival in this country, I feel, and the Urban League feels, and certainly we join you in this effort because we believe that you also believe, is the single most important issue confronting the African American community today. But I think we all recognize too that black survival is nothing new for any of us in this room. Indeed, it was 94 years ago at what some of you history majors may recall as the Great Atlanta Exposition, when our brother Booker T. Washington warned America at that time that it must properly educate its former slave, its darker brother, or be faced, in fact, with a welfare state. Let me give it to you in his own words. Booker T said, we African Americans shall constitute 1/3 and more of the ignorance and crime of the South, or we African Americans shall constitute 1/3 of its intelligence, 1/3 of its progress. We shall constitute 1/3 of the business and industrial prosperity of the South, or we shall prove a veritable body of death, stagnation, and depression, retarding every effort to advance the body politic. Now, these are the words of Booker T. Washington in 1895. Today, the sober words of the social researchers are ringing in our ears, and they're saying exactly the same thing. They are echoing the same warnings of Booker T. They're saying that between 1984 and 1986, the lifespan, that is the life expectancy for blacks, dropped for 2 consecutive years, while white life expectancy was rising. And all this happened largely because of the alarming increase in the number of black men who are dying all around us, left and right. We're told today that 1 out of every 28 black men will be murdered this year from our statistics. This is an alarming prediction. And this is also the first time in 25 years that any group on which information has been collected by the Bureau of Census, that any group, black or white, has experienced a 2-year decline in their life expectancy. So there is great need for our concern, and there is great need for this meeting. We do know that there are a number of conditions that have gone unchecked in our communities, and these conditions are causing a dramatic increase in the black male death rate. And we need to start talking about how we can stop the violence, how we can stop the waste. We're seeing the detrimental effects of long-term employment here. We're seeing the effects of long-term racism and sustained discrimination in housing and education in all our communities. We're seeing increased drug use. We're seeing increased illnesses related to stress and hypertension. We're seeing murder as a management tool for drug trafficking. We're seeing the AIDS epidemic attack our community at a rate that is double that for whites. And the larger tragedy, I suppose, is that very few people are taking heed, indeed are taking responsibility for the endangered status of adolescent black males, nor, for that matter, for the survival of African American families in African American communities. Does it make you uncomfortable to know that statistics compiled by our own government tell us that 1 in 5 of the black men in this room, born in 1936, and we give honor to them, should have been dead by 1986? Think about it. If you're 53 years or older, you've survived already what is tantamount in this country to a black Holocaust. All I have to say is, I think it is time for us to listen. I think it is time for us to have more meetings like this. I'm really very pleased today to bring greetings from the National Urban League and to support Medgar Evers College in what we feel is vitally important to the stability of African American families in America. The Urban League has been involved in developing and promoting adolescent male responsibilities since 1985. We're now providing 25 local Urban League communities with services developed to build positive role models for young men. And we're also involved through our affiliates, and there are 113 of them, in reducing teenage pregnancies, and we're actively supporting those young brothers who do become young fathers at an early age. We're trying to make a difference with these young men. Often it feels, however, that we have a bucket in front of an ocean of problems. The growing number of African American families headed by young single women is a problem we feel directly related to the declining economic condition of black men in our community. The Grace Commission, and I'm sure many of you have seen the survey that this commission is sending around the country. This commission is recommending budget cuts totaling over $314 billion in deficit reduction. And they want to do it without raising taxes for middle and upper income families. You better believe that if they don't pay, somehow I'm certain that we will. Never forget that a black man's worth in this nation is based almost exclusively on our ability to produce and to provide for our families. Therefore, the usefulness of our brothers in this economy has become a compelling issue. Once we were an economic asset to this country, but now we're considered to be something akin to an economic drag. And we better listen. The wood has all been cut. The water has all been drawn. The cotton has all been picked. And the railroads have reached from coast to coast. So now, what we're facing is a nation, is a society that is brutally pragmatic, technologically advanced, and deeply racist. In such a society, the absence of social and economic value is a critical factor in anyone's fight for a future. So what this means is that our communities, our people, should stop at this point and stand up for what we would consider to be the best in ourselves, what we would consider to be our best values, what we care for. I want to thank Dr. Edwards and Dr. Corby and our dais guests for inviting the Urban League here, and I wish you much success in your effort. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Fitzhugh. Okay, we'll continue now with our panel presentations, and after the presentations, we should have time for you to ask questions of the panelists. And the first person, the order is slightly different as you have listed in your program. The first person who will present to you is Dr. Ara Ahmed Mead, and his topic is black sexuality and masculinity.
Good morning. I'm Dr. Robert A. Mead. I'm a clinical psychologist who maintains a private practice in New York City. And whenever the topic sexuality and masculinity arises, it always brings me back to some childhood, or I guess early youthful experiences I had in Richmond, Virginia, where I grew up. I wasn't considered a very popular person when I was about 14, 15, or 16. Even today, some people don't like me, but the reasons are different. Back then, my reputation, unfortunately, and I tried to live this down every day, was that he's a smart kid. You know, he goes to school, he reads, he does his homework, he makes A's. So as a result, that didn't really put me in a good light with a lot of the young teenage girls, or even some of my peer group friends at that time. Whenever I got together with other black males around that age, the topic was never around what books had you read, how well had you understood it, or even what grades you got, but the topics inevitably centered around sports and sex. And long before I actually had sex, I was somewhat late, maybe in terms of today's standards, I had boasted of my sexual prowess with dozens of women. I had boasted of my ability to satisfy and to generate multiple orgasms in a number of young girls, when in fact I had never even had sex. But this seemed to be the thing to say if you wanted to be accepted by your peer groups. I only said it because all my friends were saying it, and I didn't want to seem sort of on the outside. Later on, much later, when I spoke to some of my friends, I found that a lot of them were lying also, that most of us were fairly inexperienced and fairly unsophisticated around sexual matters, but to hear us talk about it, we were all sexual animals and beasts even at such a young age. Just to show how far we've come in, I guess since we're talking 20 or almost 30 years since all these experiences happened, two of my activities as a psychologist: one, I run a group with adolescent boys, young teenage boys, and I also last year ran a group of black adult men, many of whom were professionals, doctors, lawyers like myself, and surprisingly the topic still in both groups centered a lot around the concept of sexuality, conquest, and prowess. It seemed as if even today, in spite of how far we've come, a lot of male identity in terms of their own personal self-esteem and their ability to see themselves as a worthy people revolves around the concept of sexuality. There is a very popular theory in the black community, the so-called conspiracy theory. Probably people have heard about the concept of AIDS as germ warfare, crack as chemical warfare, and an even more insidious form of warfare certainly is racism, which is a kind of psychological warfare. And in some ways it's even more destructive because the concept of psychological warfare deals with the concept of identity. Who am I? What is my worth, and how do I manifest myself? One of the more self-destructive components of racism is the concept of self-hatred. Basically, racism means hate yourself and hate everybody that looks just like you. If you ask any person on the street whether they hated themselves, odds are they would say no. But typically the evidence is not in what you say, but in what you do. If you look at the consequences of your behavior, a lot of times the evidence suggests that there is a great deal of self-hatred and hatred of people that look like us, people of color, that's being manifested in the black community. Identity is something that's, I guess, in the process of being evolved throughout one's life. Certainly there are at least two components of identity. One is our self-identity, who we say we are, and then there's also an externally imposed identity in terms of who other people say we are. And sometimes there can be quite a conflict between the two. Most identity may ultimately be manifested with a person feeling, I am somebody, acknowledging that they do have a certain amount of worth, power, and control over their own affairs. Or perhaps it's who am I, people who are actually searching for an identity and are unsure in terms of who they are, in terms of their values, their self-worth, etc. Or I am nobody, which is another identity concept that again implies a certain diminishment of self-esteem and a sense of perhaps feeling personally powerless and inadequate. Certainly the origins of identity, a lot of it relates to our own personal experiences. Every time a parent tells a child, you're nothing but the devil, you're so bad, that contributes to a person's identity versus someone saying, I don't like what you did, but I still respect you as a person. That in itself has a lot of impact on who we see we are. A person who says, you can't do anything, you're not going to amount to nothing, is making a strong statement on someone's future identity versus someone who says, I know this is a difficult task, but if you keep trying, I think you'll be able to work it out. So we can see that identity, a lot comes from the personal messages we get as children. Certainly another aspect of identity is the historical experiences of people of color in general. We know that one of the things that unites us historically is the whole experience of slavery, in which the identity of black people was not controlled by themselves, but controlled by the slave masters. During slavery, a black male could only have worth for two things. One was his ability to work from sunrise to sunset, and his other was his ability to impregnate women and produce children. Those were the only things of value that black men could identify with. Many of the other, and in fact the concept of being a real man in many ways was related to that. Even today we see similar things with the emphasis on athleticism and sexuality, that still there's a very rigid definition of what it is to be a man or masculinity based on concepts that originally were not something that we identified or produced ourselves. During slavery, qualities such as being able to provide for your family or to provide protection or support for your family were in fact counterindicated, that to be a slave you couldn't make any kind of claims around family stability because you didn't have any personal identity of your own. Certainly another source of one's personal identity are sociological and media kinds of images that are being portrayed and projected. We all know that the media is a male-dominated phenomena, and basically anything we see in the media is nothing but a reflection of some white person's fantasies, a white man's fantasies at that, which is not surprisingly why there's so much sex and aggression on TV. These are the fantasies arising out of the minds and psyches of white men. However, too many of our black youth use the media as a source of their own personal identity. They use sexuality to sell anything. I was looking at TV, they was selling drain cleaner, but yet they had paired this somehow with a very sexually seductive woman, and this somehow had something to do with drain cleaning. So you can see how they can take sexuality paired with anything to give a message that, you know, sexuality is something that we all must strive for in terms of our own personal and self-identity. Certainly sexuality can be manifested in many ways. There are many, many positive manifestations of sexuality, and certainly it can be a component of love. As a matter of fact, when I ran a group with black women, many of them reported that a black man was more likely to say I love you either in the throes of lovemaking or maybe just prior to lovemaking when he's trying to have sex, or perhaps just after lovemaking. This is when, according to black women, black men were more likely to use the term I love you. So again, they are showing a very, an equation of sex and love, that to a lot of people, love and sex are somehow intertwined and the two are unrelated. However, in working with, in clinical psychology, I get to see a lot of the negative manifestations of sexuality. Sex can frequently be used as a weapon in an aggressive sense, and that when we look at some of the consequences of sexual behavior, some of which are in fact genocidal, we can see things like the proliferation of AIDS as a sexually transmitted disease, other sexually transmitted diseases, teenage pregnancies, and many unwanted pregnancies, frequently the outcomes of putting sexuality at the forefront of one's identity. Also, in working individually with people, I see that sex is typically a defense mechanism that's used to combat many other kinds of psychological disorders. Many people use sex, as I said before, in their quest for love. There was one client that I had who seemed to spend most of the therapy session, I thought he was trying to impress me with his sexual prowess, but he boasted of hundreds of women, and he sort of kept a scorecard, and he had like goals, like for the month he wanted to have sex with this many different women, etc. And you know, when talking about it with him, he always talked about his quest for the so-called perfect woman who could never find, and how when he initially met women, he always saw them initially as this ideal woman he was always looking for. And he felt obsessed with having sex with the woman, which to him was his way of saying that he's being accepted by her. He equated sex with acceptance, except that what happened is whenever he had sex with a woman, he found out that his perceptions of her changed. He was no longer this idealized woman. He would devalue her, and then he would immediately become obsessed with some other woman. So in a way, he was using sex very self-destructively to perhaps avoid looking at other issues around his personal sense of inadequacy and power, but he was using sex in terms of trying to find this elusive love. This is a classic case of looking for love in all the wrong places, in fact. Fortunately, the fellow's still in treatment with me, and it seems like he will be for quite a while. Also, I've found that sex can be used as a defense against depression. A lot of people complain about boredom, a sense of feeling empty in their personal existence, and they use sex or the conquest of sex as a way of combating this. It's almost like self-medication. As long as you're having sex during that actual experience, you're no longer aware of other sad or depressed affect. However, again, once the actual activity is over, not only typically is the sex not that satisfying because it's not sex for the purpose of sex, but it's sex for the purposes of avoiding something else. But again, the feeling of depression typically comes again, and then there's a need to go and have sex again as a way of combating it. Another way that sex is used, one of the things that has happened, I guess, systematically with men of color is that there has been, in fact, a systematic denial of certain resources in the society, that things that may typically or more appropriately be identified as symbolic of a man, things like maybe having a job, having an education, having a sense of power and control over your own personal affairs, have been systematically denied to many black people. I mean, this is a historical fact. And as a result, many people, and particularly black youths, have a personal sense of inadequacy. When you see conditions around you are oppressive and you feel personally unable to have any impact on what's going on in your life, it contributes to a sense of powerlessness. That's a very anxiety-provoking situation. Most people don't like to feel that they have no power. It also contributes to a sense of inadequacy and inferiority. You're unable to not only control your own personal self, but things around you have no control over. As a result, there may be a need to overcompensate by only focusing on those areas that you feel you do have some control over, which in fact may be your body. A lot of black adolescents are very much into control of their personal body in terms of the skills they can do. You go to any basketball court, it's like going to a ballet. I was at the park yesterday with my son, and there was a group of teenage boys playing basketball like to the side, and I was so impressed with how skillful these young boys were in terms of the body control. They could soar through the air, hang time, a lot of things. But this is an area that gives them a sense of power and control. You can directly control your body. And in some ways, this has been also translated into sex. People who are able to control their sexual organs and to control ejaculation can gain a sense of sort of quasi-power, in that there is this one thing that I can control, and this is what I'm going to focus on. That's why a lot of these boys can play basketball, perhaps perform sex more than adequately, but yet in other areas of their life they may feel very personally inadequate or out of control. Perhaps, say, like in school settings or in settings where there's a call for greater responsibility and control over themselves, they feel inadequate, so only naturally they will tend to avoid those areas. One of the things that had been spoken about in the recent incident in Central Park around this phenomenon of wilding was some of the personal inadequacy they felt that many of the boys had, that their existences were not such that they had a sense of personal control and power, and that by, first of all, banding together in a group, you certainly enhance one's sense of power versus one's individual power, but also that the sexual and aggressive nature of their behavior they felt was somehow an overcompensation for perhaps personal feelings of inadequacy and inferiority. So another way sex can be used in a maladaptive manner is the concept of anger and resentment toward women. A lot of times, again, the penis can be seen as a weapon, and sex can be seen not only as a loving act, but as an aggressive and violent act. You look at the statistics on rape, and this is probably one of the best indicators of how sex can be used as an aggressive element. So what I'm saying is basically that in terms of our definitions of manhood and masculinity, there needs to be a greater, or actually a a need for a redefinition of what masculinity is. For too long, we have allowed forces and sources outside of ourselves to define what it is to be a man. The media, other people, our peer groups, they're saying to be masculinity and sexuality are somehow equated. They're one and the same. If you're not sexually active as a man, then that makes you a punk or a sissy. That's something that I could identify with this situation. It was a young boy carrying a bunch of books. Reminded me of myself, except I was a little more attractive than this fellow. But anyway, there were a lot of other young boys on the bus, and they were like sitting toward the rear, and they were all talking, of course, about sex, 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 sex. And this other fellow had these books, and then the topic turned to they started taunting this fellow with the books. And it was calling him punk, sissy, put those books down, etc. And I could see the kid was personally distraught, but I didn't really intervene at that time. But just the fact that a book can be equated with something non-masculine shows you how far we have to come or how far we have to go in terms of really changing people's attitudes and values and their behavior. There needs to be a greater need to have a more expanded concept of what masculinity is, a concept that includes many behaviors that traditionally were considered feminine. There has been an overemphasis on the macho component of manhood, being not needing help, not being nurturing, not being sensitive, not being kind, when in fact these are all human values. There may need to be a greater emphasis on becoming whole people, accepting all parts of ourselves equally, as opposed to, by definition, eliminating a whole repertoire of behaviors that in fact may be very adaptive in terms of one's life. There needs to be a greater emphasis on defining manhood and masculinity in terms of personal control and autonomy over one's life, the ability to make plans, to set goals, and to use your own personal resources and the resources around you to achieve them. There needs to be more emphasis on this. There needs to be more emphasis on sexuality in a responsible sense. We are all sexual beings, and there's definitely a sexual need that all people manifest, but we also have to look at being able to creatively meet these needs in a responsible manner. Manhood should not be how many women you can get pregnant and how many children you can leave to the welfare system, but it should be on being able to responsibly provide and care for your offspring. Again, it's a challenge that we as mental health professionals and educators must take very seriously, because a lot of our youth are not getting alternative messages about the value of other behaviors beyond sexuality and athleticism. And as a result, a whole generation of youth are being lost in terms of their personal identity. People are feeling inadequate, they are feeling frustrated, and they are acting out too often in a sexually and inappropriate manner. And the results can be extremely catastrophic, as we've already seen, in terms of the crime rates, the pregnancy rates, continuing poverty, etc. Okay, so I think that's sort of the comments I wanted to make at this time.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Mead, for those comments. Okay, next we have Dr. Lenora Fulani as our second speaker, and her topic is social and political aspects of psychotherapy.
Good morning, and thanks to the Psychology Club, Dr. Edwards, and Dr. Corby, and dais guests. It's very nice to be here. I'm glad to have the opportunity to speak with you about the struggle, basically, to transform the black male from an endangered species to an empowered one. As a developmental psychologist, as a single mother of 2 black children, a daughter who's 15 and a son who's 12, and as the chairperson of the black-led independent New Alliance Party, the empowerment of all African American people is something that I care very much about. I wanted to begin. I'm not going to be able to give my whole talk because it's longer than it's supposed to be, so somebody should just say when. But I wanted to begin by sharing a quote with you from Dr. King. It's one of my favorite quotes from him. It speaks to the issue of maladjustment and the fact that the society is so screwed up that we're healthy if we are maladjusted to it. Dr. King says, today psychologists have a favored word, and that word is maladjusted. I tell you today that there are some things in our social system to which I am proud to be maladjusted. I shall never be adjusted to lynch mobs, segregation, economic inequalities, the madness of militarism, and self-defeating physical violence. The salvation of the world lies in the maladjusted. Now, you know, there are people in this country, actually in this field, that say that politics and psychology don't or should not mix, that psychology should be objective. I disagree because I think, in my opinion, there is no such thing as a neutral psychology, and we didn't end up mixing it. It came mixed. A psychological theory that basically, and practice that views middle-class white men as the emotional, intellectual, and developmental norm, which traditional psychology does, is neither socially nor politically neutral. A psychology which prescribes a socialization process for children that teaches them the values, aspirations, and emotions appropriate for adapting to a world in which middle-class white men are normal is also not neutral. Regardless of who practices this kind of psychology, psychology is embedded in politics, and politics is embedded in it. It is also fundamentally conservative, which means that it is fundamentally institutionally racist, sexist, and classist, because it validates rather than challenges the status quo. And it doesn't matter if it's intentional or not. And basically, the function is to keep our people in our socially prescribed places, which is at the bottom. One of the things that I've been sharing with people around the country is the latest U.S. Census report, which points out the proportion of black Americans living in poverty in 1987 was 33.1%, one black person in every three. 49% of our children under 6 were poor in that same year. And of course, these figures grossly understate how many of us are actually poor. There are comparable statistics on police brutality, imprisonment, alcoholism, drug addiction, AIDS, tuberculosis, mental illness, and violence in our community that show that black men are basically dying of racism, the condition of being black in white America. The question, can we save the black man from extinction? And I'm not just talking about survival. We deserve much more than that. I'm talking about empowerment. I have a very, very special, particular thoughts about this, as many of us I'm sure do. As a young child at the age of 12, I watched my father dying in bed because an ambulance service would not come into the black community and save him. And by the time we got him to the hospital, he died as he was being transferred from a stretcher onto the hospital bed. I also, in 1966, had 7 nephews. Today, I have 2 that are still living, and they're barely doing that. I have a young son, and I'm not dumb enough to believe that since the Civil Rights Movement and Black Power movement made it possible for me to go to school, that he would be able, or my daughter, to follow in my footsteps unless we fight for their empowerment. So I think the answer, however, to this question of empowerment, can we save black men from extinction, is yes. And I think key to that transformation is independence. I think that the black man must declare his independence from an economic, political, cultural, psychological, and sexual system that assigns him to a series of roles, all of which are disempowering, disfiguring, dismissive, and very, very, very dangerous. I just want to run through some of these roles that are prescribed to black men by this society. There is a poor black man, a downtrodden victim, humiliatingly dependent on the small change thrown his way by his boss, by a grudging welfare system, or a resentful woman. Another role is that of the crook, the con artist, always trying to get over, always, quote, up to something, always in trouble with someone, his partners, his competition, his customers, not to mention the cops. There's a ladies' man who parades his sexuality like it's the only thing he's got that's worth anything. There's the alcoholic, the addict, the gambler, all desperately, suicidally dependent on getting high off of something that can make them get away for a moment from the profoundly dehumanizing experience of being endangered. And then there is, of course, the black man who has made it, allowed to be somebody in the white man's world on the condition that he forgets his blackness, on the condition that he ignores the blackness of his black sisters and brothers, on the condition that he agrees to keep silent about what it really is like to be black in white America. As our great teacher, W.E.B. Du Bois, reminds us, racism doesn't mean that some act of terror or brutality has to be committed against us every day. Racism simply means that such an act can always occur any day. It means we are never, ever out of danger. Over the last 10 years, my colleagues and I have been developing a theory and practice of psychology, which we call social therapy, that basically refuses to leave black and Latino people at the mercy of a system which regards our lives as expendable. One of the key concepts in social therapy, which is a drug-free therapy of empowerment, is the concept of development and as well the concept of underdevelopment. Like many terms used in human psychology, terms like crises and depression, development and underdevelopment are also economic terms. Used as an economic term, underdevelopment is usually applied to countries in Asia, Africa, and Latin America that have been colonies or are often now neo-colonies. Some characteristics of underdeveloped countries are that they are made structurally dependent on the world market, and that everything, their wealth, is grabbed by the developed countries, and severe restrictions are placed on their use of their own potential. In his book, How Europe Underdeveloped Africa, Walter Rodney, a gifted Guyanese scholar and liberation fighter who was assassinated by the Guyanese government, makes the point that it is a mistake to look inside Africa to explain its underdevelopment and economic backwardness. The only thing you can find inside Africa are the symptoms, not the causes. The true explanation lies in seeking out the relationship between Africa and certain developed countries and in recognizing that it is a relationship of exploitation. Likewise, prevailing explanations of antisocial violence on the part of young men, the explanation being offered, for example, for the Central Park attack on the woman jogger, for example, identify the cause of such violence as being rooted in the nature of black youth or in the pathology of the black family, rather than in the relationship of poor men to a system which slowly, intentionally, and viciously underdevelops them, and then blames and punishes these young victims. If you listen to what's being said about the kids who are being questioned about the Central Park incident, you would never ever know that they hadn't already been found guilty of that incident. One of the statements made by the chief prosecutor in the Family Court Division is that he thinks that the kids did this because of what he called their predatory nature. A basic assumption of conventional psychology is that only young people can develop. An assumption of social therapy is that development can take place at any age, and that it is in fact unlimited. And it is society that places those limits on our development, not anything inherent in us. Especially if we are black, if we are poor, our development is not just ignored, it is intentionally stifled and stunted. In fact, drugs are a major means by which the misdevelopment of poor people of color is accomplished. I just want to mention briefly, I'm working with Larry Davis, also known as Adam Abdul Hakim, the brother who many people think is out of prison because he was acquitted of 2 charges, and raised the fact that police are using our young people to peddle drugs for them, and when they try to get out of that, they end up getting murdered. And we need to be supporting him. We're actually going to have an event on June 25th at the Cotton Club called Save Our Youth, and all of you should come. So when we are forced to adapt to a society that has no room for us except as failures and misfits, we can either accept those degrading and humiliating roles, or we can rebel. But even the means of rebellion made available to us, drugs and crime, are not socially constructive nor developmental, but abusive and all too often visited on other poor black people and ourselves. In fact, we are damned if we do and damned if we don't adjust to being black in white America. It is our forced adaptation, our forced adjustment to this oppressive and repressive society which closes down development. So one of the things that we are concerned about in social therapy is how do you reinitiate development? How do you open it up? One of the key premises of social therapy is that human emotionality is socially organized. It is just as much organized as anything else in society: language, sexuality, child rearing, art, religion, economics, whatever. In other words, the practice of emotions, the expression of emotions, how we understand them, even the meaning of pain, humiliation, shame, joy, grief, satisfaction, desire, anger, vary from culture to culture. In contemporary American society, the organization of human emotionality is characterized, unfortunately, by alienation, meaning that the process by which emotions are produced is separate from the emotions, the products themselves. Just think about how we are taught to think of our feelings as private, individual, and internal. We don't know how they got there. They're just there. So basically, one of the things that we do, and it would take some time to explain what that looks like, is help people to reorganize their emotional responses to different kinds of things that have happened in life as a way to stimulate new forms and different kinds of development. I just wanted to give you an example from my therapeutic practice of what I'm talking about. I was working with a young man, actually a black man in his 30s. He had grown up as a lame who was excluded for most of his adolescence from the, quote, boys club. The boys club is basically an early organization of masculinity that defines what real men do and who they are. Boys and men will pay any dues to get in and stay in because it's very, very painful to be outside of it. Boys clubs are sometimes formally organized in fraternities, gangs, teams, the Masons, but they also exist in the form of socially acceptable attitudes, relationships, and behavior, including, incidentally, wilding. Some of the work in social therapy is for men to socialize both the pain and cruelty of what they had to do to get in and stay in the boys' club, and also the privilege men have by virtue of being there and being born male in America. This man I was working with knew how cruel real manhood can be from his own history of being excluded from the club, and from this experience he had become sensitized to how he often treated women cruelly and abusively. But sensitivity is not enough. It is an ongoing battle for men to refuse to give in to the socialized pull to act out their privileges as men. This struggle against the socially acceptable role of real manhood is what reignites men's social and emotional development. It requires enormous support from other men and from women in the form of compassion and ruthlessness. It is the function of social therapy groups to provide the support by helping people to build an environment which allows them to grow in this way. One of the conflicts that brothers face is the humiliation of how much anger and outrage they had swallowed to stay in a variety of positions and be legitimate men. It isn't hard to understand how compelling, or the compelling need, poor working class black men have to be legitimate. I have sat and watched grown men cry in my office over the consequences of living in a society which regards them as permanently and illegitimate. The feelings this engenders have to be exposed and shared, but doing so is not a manly activity, and many brothers just won't do that. Many brothers want help to be in less pain, but can't tolerate the pain of having a life shaken up when they've worked so hard to get it together and to look like it's together. Men in this society are socialized to be withdrawn and withholding. It is one of the ways in which they are abusive to others, and at the same time, it is extremely deprivational for men themselves. Like their poor and working class brothers, middle class black men must struggle to look at their degradation and shame, something they are often unwilling to do. Because of the greater privilege they have by virtue of being middle class, it is often harder for them to take the risk to break out of their role as real men. They have an enormously difficult time facing the fact that in the context of the social therapy group, their status in society does not make them leaders, the smartest, or the most powerful. In fact, it is oftentimes inhibiting. Middle class training, status, and privilege serves to conservatize people makes us uptight, teaching them to know the world in ways that exclude certain people or that include them in distorted ways. It raises particular issues, for example, for middle-class black men to learn from poor black women to whom they have been socialized to believe that they are superior. It is also frightening for black professionals to expose feelings of incompetence or inadequacy because the profound and pervasive racism of the society means that the mistakes of black people are expressions of intellectual and characterological flaws. When white folks make mistakes, they just make mistakes. When black folks do, we're intellectually inferior. The deep-seated fear at having their inadequacies exposed is often covered over in middle-class black men by exaggerated assertions of their prowess and fearlessness. In social therapy, we are in the business of change, helping people to become active changers of their environments, including themselves and their emotionality, rather than passive objects of a social and emotional environment created by and for a class of people whose only interest in the development and empowerment of our people is to keep it from happening. To the degree that we as a people, as black helping professionals, are able to get the politics and psychology of middle-class white America out of our lives, our emotionality, and out of our bedrooms, we will not only empower our men, we will succeed in empowering our people. So the goal in my therapy, and I've worked with tons of black and Latino men over the years, is not to help them become real men. I think it stinks to be a real man in America. It's helping them to open up so they can participate in the leadership and the development of our people. Thank you very, very much.
Okay, let us continue with our presentations this morning. And our next speaker will be Dr. William K. Lyles, and his topic is black males and black females in love.
Thank you, Dr. Edwards. My friends, I have a topic to talk about which I know nothing. I've spent my lifetime at the lower levels as a child and as an adult trying to understand the phenomenon that we call love. All I can do is tell you what people much more knowledgeable about it than I say it is. And they talk of it with many beautiful expressions, and sometimes not so beautiful expressions, as a positive force between and among people, and sometimes directed towards inanimate objects and lower level animals. I can love a rose. I can love a table. I can love a portrait. I can love a painting, a dog, and they can love back, some of them. Black males love black females. Black males love black males. Black females love black females. And sometimes the love is sort of mixed because the beings are not truly male or female. But love is there, and I respect all those kinds of loves. particularly to the extent that they are positive forces directed towards another positive force. If indeed the forces are strong enough, they can direct the people or lead the people, male and female, blacks, towards a reality kind of action. And this is why many people use that thing called love to become very close to each other, to live with each other, to have a ceremony or not to have a ceremony, to live together and try to promote positive behavior, and sometimes behavior that's not so positive. Many people, particularly in these times, are getting closer to do negative things, negative by society's definitions of what is negative. For example, dealing and wheeling in crack and coke and heroin and opium and a number of other mind-expanding drugs, which presumably bring comfort to us, but I'm not so sure the comfort has a real comforting meaning in the long run. From the important people who talk about love, as has been implied by some of our speakers before me, love is a complex social phenomenon which indeed may become splendorous or not so splendorous. Love is facilitated by culture and communication phenomena. Love is facilitated by openness and honesty, as well as receptivity to differences. Love may or may not be the genital love that Dr. Mead alluded to. It may or may not have a religious or social significance. Here's one that I don't know how it got on my paper. Love may be sadistic or masochistic or sadomasochistic. Love may be socializing, or it may be channeled. It may be reality-oriented, or de-reality-oriented, or fantasy-oriented. It may have a biological basis. It may have an intimacy. Some would say that intimacy is a necessity of love. I don't agree. Love and sex may be coupled. Mind you, I say maybe. Sex or gender role is basic in marriage. It must be developed between people if the marriage is to continue. It is not a given, as some of us assume. Because I look like a man doesn't mean that I am. Because I look like a woman doesn't mean that I am. Sometimes we never know what we're married to until long after the marriage. Sometimes we can adapt to that newfound information, and sometimes we can't. If indeed love were that phenomenon as some of us choose to define it, the gender sex role would not matter. And with some people, this is the case. In love, marriage and sex combination in our culture women have customarily, as Dr. Fulani alluded to, submitted to husbands, barefoot, pregnant, and in the kitchen. This is a new day. And the importance of the new day, the fighting for a different kind of life by women, is evident wherever you go. I am in an organization called the Black Psychologist, where one would expect peace and harmony to reign, but Dr. Whaley, or Commissioner Whaley, Commissioner, it's a new title for a woman, would tell you that men have a rough time. Women have the balance of power. And I'm learning, Dr. Fulani, why men want that power. Without it, we are castrated, we feel weak, and we run away. I guess I'm about the only one who hasn't run away, is that not? And I don't have sense enough to run. I like fights, I like challenges, and I like fighting with love objects. I like fighting with women. I do not think that it takes away from the ability to love, to fight with one. In fact, for me, it enhances love to fight. And I'm not sadomasochistic, I don't think. But to fight intellectually, I think, is an appropriate human kind of behavior. The great problem has been keeping love alive under our cultural terms. It appears natural to maintain self-love, as Dr. Mead alluded to so eloquently. The goal in marriage is to achieve a selfless kind of love. And I think he alluded to that too, as the ability to share and not feel too threatened by the challenges of sharing, and sometimes they are very, very poignant features. Love permits equal potential in a relationship. In the drive for self-fulfillment, we become selfish, away from deep and genuine commitment. It is so hard to share love, to permit our love objects to grow, particularly when they demand something of us, or demand some of our space or some of our turf. Romantic love is what those who would dare to define it say blacks know primarily. A mainstay in love making, again, as Dr. Mead alluded to. We seek a willingness to share. We talk about sharing. Baby, I love you. I don't know what I would do without you. You're the greatest thing that ever happened to me. Why can't we make it? Be mine. I don't mean it when I'm bad to you. I don't mean it when I steal your money and buy crack and rob the children of milk and honey, cream, all the things that go to make a happy home. I don't mean it when I don't go out to work and send you out at the 7 o'clock subway. You ever been on a 7 o'clock subway? It's a rough time. And you see the faces of unhappy people. Come at 9 o'clock, you see a different type. 10 o'clock, you don't see any black faces. It is a willingness to share that we seek. Share in happiness, share in luxury, share in misery. And I'm old enough to know that all the negatives of life are an intricate part of it. Life is not a crystal stair, and it's not going to be a crystal stair. Some of us will survive and some of us will die. We look like survivors. I am. Look at my head. Look at my mustache. I feel as old as Methuselah and as young as my grandson. I think that the ability to have a perspective that we are important people, yes, but in the scheme of things, we're nothing. 2,000 years from today, as with many of our people, it will not be known that we ever existed. Even our writings will be on the back shelves. All the books we write to get our PhDs and to get tenured and so forth aren't worth a hill of beans after 20 years. Even my own books, I look at them and say, did I write this garbage? And I'm sure my grandson would call it super garbage, and his grandson wouldn't even bother to look at it. But we write with vigor, we behave with vigor, we live each day in relationship to our fellow men and our women as if this is the most important day of our life, if each of the people that we relate to is the most important person in our life. Much of what we as black men and women live with and love is historical and in many instances mythological. Absolutely no truth in many of the concepts. Much of it is a slavery kind of implementation or imprint that we live with. I won't elevate them to a point of respectability to recite some of the kinds of phenomenon that we've had to live with as males and females, and that we in many instances still do. To me, both from a historical standpoint and reviewing the black male and female relationship, particularly when we look at it from an Afrocentric perspective, is one of the most beautiful phenomenon that I know about. Even to translate the dialogue of the love, or the soliloquy of love, which it really becomes in many instances, how much I love you, baby, and you know I love you, baby. It's beautiful talk. If we think of it in a respectable way, and think of it in terms of using the interventions that Dr. Filani referred to and Dr. Mead referred to, towards making them truisms. If I say I love you, I must love you, and demonstrate that through actions. My love for you does not have to be copied from television with a mushy kiss or a pornographic display. It's carried out by actions that help or that are put forth to propel us towards a harmonious sometimes and a not so harmonious sometimes, but respectability always of interaction with each other towards the development of a family, and indeed a family of children. Children to propagate the race, children to give us more and more soldiers to fight the battle of black people. They become the warriors, and they will fight on many fronts: intellectual, scientific, business, economic, political, etc. Love in the 90s is a weird thing, some would say. And this is a paraphrase of the most up-to-date material I could find. Love in the 90s. We have shared laughs, tears, and a toothbrush. Now, how about sharing some games tonight? Then, shall we share names and marry soon? If you say no, you're either gay or lesbian or you have AIDS. Enough of this charade. Will you marry me? Oh, well, let's make love. Doesn't matter whether you marry me or not. Women are indeed more enthusiastic about getting married, stated by Ann Hood in a recent magazine called Self. Black men, black women, define your love in terms of positive intervention or interrelationships and live it. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Lyles. Okay, our next speaker will be Dr. Ramona Whaley. Okay, and her topic is socialization of black males.
Well, it's just about afternoon, and I want to thank Dr. Edwards, Dr. Corbin, and the psychology students, and any others who took part in bringing us here. I have to say this to you. I always feel good when I come to Brooklyn because everybody greets you so well. You don't always get this in Manhattan, where I live, but it's a good feeling and a good experience each time I come to Brooklyn, and this is one of them. So I wanted to share this with two of the young people that I see sometimes. That's Tony right here, stand up, Tony, and that's Jean, stand up, Jean. She won't stand up, but that's all right. They're with me a lot. Dr. Edwards said my son and daughter. They're not, but they're with me, and this is one of the things about socialization. We need to begin taking out our young people with us. I take them all the time, not just them. Sometimes I have all boys, sometimes I have all girls, sometimes I mix them up, sometimes I have little ones with me, and we go many, many places. This is just one of the places. Sometimes Dr. Lyle says, where are you going with all those children? I have a grown daughter, and I probably should have had more children because I only have one child, and I have a little baby granddaughter now. But we are a social people. Never forget that. We are a very, very social people. We see that in our eating, in our dancing, in our congregating, in our belonging to clubs, belonging to gangs, belonging to posses. Whatever we do, we are a social people. And this is all a part of socialization. So that if you can't take some young people with you and show them how things can be done or how they should relate, then I think that this is a part of our problem around not socializing our young men. Now, I said to you, I have a daughter. We all have, it's not so hard to socialize a girl. And why is that? Because usually the primary caretaker is who? A woman in the family, the mother. Even if the mother's not there, then it's usually a grandmother or an aunt or someone. So the primary caretaker in African American families in this country is usually a woman. So it is usually easier to do what? To socialize the person of the same sex. So our girls get sometimes even overly socialized. And they do, let's face it, some of the statements that have been said here have been excellent. Where does our socialization begin? In the family. From infancy, we begin socializing. It means being able to relate, being a part of a community. The first community is the family. It has to be with a mother and a father and the baby, whoever is present. But even so, again, the primary caretaker is the one in that family who gives most of the time, most of the care for that infant and for the development of that infant. And we have to be very, very seriously involved in order to see how this child is going to develop and take some time. Part of the socialization around eating, around play, around changing a diaper, around the care and the nurturing that we give this child. This is the beginning of the relationship and the socialization of every child. And in particular, we need to look at that carefully as to how it is done with our young men. Why? Because we begin to see later on a straying away from the socialization and the values that we have gotten in the family. I do need a little water. And what happens is we begin, some things develop that we don't want to develop. You know, no one comes here violent. I want you to understand that. No one comes here shy. No one comes here with bad attitudes about things. These are learned behaviors. I'm not going to get into a whole thing about psychology, but I want you to understand that you are responsible for a shy child. You begin those behaviors that bring about shyness and not talking and withdrawing and building and the development of poor self-concept. I'm going to take a minute on self-concept so that you can learn about socializing your own children or your friends or your family or the people that you come in contact with. You can be a little more responsible in the development of self-concept. We hear all the time somebody has poor self-esteem. These boys have poor self-esteem. These girls. Most of the time, it's our young boys who begin to develop poor self-esteem. Self-esteem is a part of the self-concept, which begins early development from the crib. It begins right there. You are responsible for that. If you are parents, if you are a caretaker, a primary caretaker, or someone who is significant in the life of that child, you are certainly responsible. Whether that child is a shy child or becomes a violent child or a crying child, all of those behaviors. Yes, children come here with a little colic and things like that. That takes a great deal of attention. I hope no one's child has 3 or 4 months of colic. That's that sign of kind of a little stomach thing that makes them cry and cry for no real reason. That is very difficult to deal with. Your own personality has to help you deal with that kind of behavior. So that any time if you do have a child like that, if you can get someone in the family to give you a break for an hour, ask for a break. Don't beat the child. Don't yell at the child. These are the behaviors that begin the socialization of that child. And many of us are not really ready for that. We have a lot of young teens and who are parents now who are themselves under-socialized. So therefore, they do not know how to take care of a child in this socialization aspect that I'm trying to tell you about, especially in the development of self-concept. What am I talking about with that? This is something that we all need to do and tell our friends. It begins very, very early, just in a one-to-one thing with any child, beginning with them beginning to learn how to do something. The need to, oh, thank you. Thanks. If you want a child to become responsible, how do you do that? You don't wait until they're 13 or 14 and say, boy, you are not responsible. You don't take care of your shoes. You don't take care of your clothes. You don't hang up anything. You don't help me in the house. You begin very, very early by allowing a child, even at age 2, that young, to begin doing something that he may want to do, that may not be doing it so well, but allow the child to do it. If the child wants to put his own shoes on at 2, let him. Put his socks on at 2, let him. Comb his hair at 2, let him. And then compliment him on the effort that he has made in doing that. And say, oh, that was pretty good. Now let me show you a little bit more. You begin very early by allowing the child to do certain things that will show that he has accomplished something, and give him some praise. It may not even be well done, but begin with the praise so that he will feel very strongly about this accomplishment. I'm using males because this is our topic today, but girls too. All of us need to show them how to do these things, help them at it, and let them do it first themselves. Praise them each time, especially on a weekend if they don't have any place to go. Allow them to dress themselves. They may be all dressed backwards and everything else. Give them some praise and allow them to do this. Give them a little section for their clothes, a little section for their shoes. Let them know where things go. You have a crowded house, take a little box, make something, and put your name. This is yours, and this is for your things. These are your sister's things. We have problems with older children and little children always in the older ones' things. Give them their own little space. Everyone needs a little space. This is a problem with us now. We all socialize at some time, but again, we need our space to know what we are doing for ourselves. And a family can do this. There can be large families who no one ever has any time. The bathroom is always in use. These are difficult things, especially with large families, but you can begin, and you can be proud of this child who is learning how to do things. What a mess they make. But begin with some praise. Say, next time, use this, use that. Shy children are always shunted on the side. When you have company and you don't want to have them around, you might have some noisy company. If there's something there that children can't hear, that's different. But if it's just adult company and no one else around, do not put them in another room to be shunted off and reward them saying, "You've been so good and quiet." Every time someone comes, you kiss them and hug them and say, "Go in the other room and be quiet. We have company." So that by the time they come out and they've got a little dance they want to do, you say, "Show that little dance." They're not going to show any dance because they have always been rewarded for being quiet. Then you wonder why you have raised this quiet child who is so shy. And that is your responsibility. That child then is what? Under-socialized. All right, I just want to give you some of these things because I know that our time will be going. I wanted to talk about that self-concept. You're responsible for self-concept. And then you can say, "Gee, that kid does really well. He does well because you've allowed him to do certain things on his own, show what he can do, and shine, and praise him." All of this rewarding, all the beating that we do only reinforces the same behavior. I don't have to get into that. People say, beat, don't beat. I don't get into that. I think if you can talk to a child, change your voice and your tone, and the child will listen to you. That also begins very early. Once we say, "I can't do anything with him," you will never be able to do anything with him. I have those in my practice all the time. I think you have to also say no and mean no to your children. You want to do this? No, you cannot. And then you can and they say, "Why?" Give a reason. Another reason, why? Give another reason. After about 4 or 5 reasons, I will not give you any more because I have told you no. And do not feel bad with that. They should respect you because you are, again, the socializer in the family and the primary caretaker. And you have to know what your role is and be able to deal with your role as the primary caretaker in that family. Socialization, the first unit is the family, and you are the prime socializer. And if you want to not have violent behavior, then you begin by socializing with the child without the beating, without the yelling, without the sense of not ever rewarding children. Children want to be rewarded. When they come home from school and say, I did just as well as someone else, and I didn't get my painting put up, get the painting and put it up on your wall. You have to show them that you appreciate the efforts that they have made. I have a couple of other things that I wanted to bring about here. Making friends. That's a part of socialization. You can't always pick your children's friends. When they're little, you control that. If they're in a little kindergarten group, or you pick a Head Start group, or whatever it is, you're the one who's picked that group. It's when they begin to get older, and in school grades, you know who their friends are. It's that preteen and teen that you are no longer in charge of the selection of their friends. It has to do with the things that you have suggested and have strongly dealt with in those early developing years. When someone comes and you say, geez, you've got some, bring your friends over to the house. When they don't bring their friends over to the house, not because they're ashamed of their friends. There's something wrong with you sometimes. Yes, there's something wrong that says, I just can't bring my friends to my mother thinks everything must be so perfect. And my friends won't be comfortable there. And then parents question that. Again, we do this, we're very, very careful with girls because we have the girls doing dishes, the girls cleaning up, the girls doing this, and allowing boys not to do any of these things. So when boys don't do anything at home, they're not going to do anything outside, they're not going to do anything in their relationships, they're not going to do anything when they're married. They remember that this was the way it was, and that's the way it continues to be, and we have generations of immature men who have never learned things to do at home. And immaturity breeds anger and contempt. Who's any more angry and contempt than little children who can't have their way? And when we do this and perpetuate it, we have a generation of adult, immature men who don't know how to conduct themselves when they are in confrontations, who don't know how to conduct themselves when they're in relationships with women. They don't know how to conduct themselves because they have always been able to walk out the door when they were angry at home. I'm from a family of brothers and sisters, and I know my sisters and I laid more linoleum and painted more walls as my brothers stepped over us getting out of the house. And I have one that's on me every week. Dr. Lyles is my therapist if I sometimes when I have to say what goes on in that relationship. He has never grown up. All I can say is that there are three of us together, and the problem there, we're only like a year apart. I was too young to understand what was happening to him as a little child. As an adult, and certainly and as a professional psychologist, I know now. But those behaviors have never changed. Never. He has done more than 17 or 18 years in prison, off and on, things like this. Raised in the same household. I see the things that happened to him with older parents who did not really know how to deal with a young boy. And so the two older sisters, and this is true in so many African American families, taking care of the little ones. You relegate that to your older children, and you will have angry children, and you will have little ones who will not be raised properly. And I know when we were told, my sister and I were told to help him with homework, you know what happened? We wanted to go outside and play. We did the homework. I didn't know he could write. You know, when he got to prison and I got the assessment, I said, gee, he can write. I didn't even know he could. I'm serious. But we have done this to our families and to our brothers. My mother told us all the time, take your brother with you. And if we could, what did we do? We hid him or left him. And those things generate terrible kinds of responses. And I will tell you, my sister and I were very well socialized by my mother. And my father was in the home also. But there was a great deal of caring about how we looked and how we acted. And I brought in all good marks all the time, and everything was put up. And my sister, the two of us, there was a great deal of praise for us at all times. But he was the last one, and they were tired, I'm sure. They were older parents, and they were tired. That's why I have a problem sometimes. Please don't feel bad, but I have a problem sometimes with grandparents who certainly love their grandchildren, raising the children today. Too much has gotten away with. Grandparents are tired. I'm tired. And I have a little granddaughter who's already starting little things, you know. Their personalities develop very early. But we do have to understand some of the things that go on in the family structure. And there doesn't have to be a man there, but it is important. And I think today, I'm going to tell you something else that I know is a fact, that young boys, in fact young children, but in particular, our young boys need to know who their father is. If he's not there, they need to know. If they did not just pop into this world, and they need to know where he is and what he is doing. If he's down on the Bowery, drunk, you need to take him down there and say, there he is. He had some good years, but something happened. This society says that people say about, well, you know, they can turn around. I can almost look at a child at about age 10, 12, Dr. Lyle too, and I can almost tell you if that child is through. I hate that. I hate to be able to do that. But that is almost a fact. So some of the things that I want you to do, take some time with your own children, take them out, try to take them out once a week if it's only for a walk around the park. I take children out all the time. They're not my children, but I love them. If it's to the movies, to see some terrible movie that they want to see, I go. You know, if it's to Wendy's to have a sandwich, we all go. If it's I have friends that have those time-sharing things. I don't own one, but they give me a weekend up in the Poconos. One weekend I take girls, next weekend I take boys. I don't leave anybody out. Dr. Lyle takes people. We know that we have to do this. Take some time. Go over to a school in your community. See if you can do a little tutoring, some reading. Take some time and do it. You will be able to save someone if you can. You know, you can say, oh, I'm so overwhelmed. I am too, but I take some time and go into Harlem Hospital and sit with a board of babies. We have them, you know, Harlem Hospital probably has the most in the city. I know that it is not the same phenomenon in Philadelphia. I have family who are medical professionals in the hospital system in Philadelphia. They don't have anything like that. This is a New York phenomenon. This is really an atypical place. Please believe this is not a typical metropolis at all. This is the only city probably in the world that has that's the inner city, which usually is spoken of as us who are poor or something like that. This is the only city that has the bulk of the millionaires and billionaires for about 100 blocks in the inner city in New York City. And that will not change. You have old money of like the Kennedys and the Rockefellers, and then you have the new money of the Trumps, all in that area where that young woman was killed, where there's that little visible/invisible thing that says 96th Street, don't come down here because we're rich and white. And then the other side, and don't come up here because we're poor and in the project. There is a segment, be it small or whatever, in that incident that occurred in Central Park. There is a little semblance of race in that. I think that had I been coming through there or any of the women here, we might all have been attacked. I don't want to ever dismiss that. But I do think since there's that demarcation, that kind of invisible demarcation at 96th Street, especially on the east side where some of the wealthiest people in the world live, that don't come down here. And then we all know from uptown not to go down there. I just wanted to bring out some of these things about socialization. And when you have children who talk to you about joining a club or a gang, I've had young people, adolescents, who have said that she wanted to join a posse. So I said, well, what is a posse? And so the other girls in the group said, well, you know, it's kind of like a club. So I said, well, you tell me what it's like. She said, these are my friends. I'm with them all the time. She's a middle-income young woman. Pretty, you know, family, has a home, so forth. Not own a house. I said, well, what does that mean? She said, well, you know, I go with them all the time. I hang with them all the time. We go here and there, dances, you know, McDonald's and so forth. So I said, well, what is it that you need to know? She said, well, they keep begging me and pushing me to join this it was called the Valley Posse. So I think someone in the group was real. I was so glad that it didn't come from me. So she said, well, do you really want to join? She said, I haven't made up my mind, but they're pressing me so much. And she said, so I said, well, are they your friends? She said, yes, these are my very close friends. So one of the teenagers in the group turned around and so she said, well, if they keep trying to make you join, they can't be your friends. And I think that this is something that we all need to look at, and especially with our young men. And I want to know, why didn't she go to her mother first? So I said, you know, if you can come and tell me, you can also tell your mother. That is not a dangerous question. That is a question that your mother needs to know, because these are the friends that you go around with all the time, that had to leave. He had another appointment. But we are very happy to be here. And I am very concerned about our young men. Dr. Lyles has a book that a colleague of ours just wrote, Dr. Nancy Boyd Franklin, who she's, did you bring it? She's from Brooklyn. And it's called Black Families in Therapy. There's good stuff in there. All that stuff about skin color that we all say, we don't have that anymore. Baloney. You know, and hair and all kinds of things like that that we are confronted with. It's a good book, and Dr. Lyles has it with him. I want to close on that because we also have to leave here. Black psychologists do everything. We are considered experts on AIDS. We had some specialized training for the Center for Disease Control in Washington, and Dr. Lyles and I have to make a presentation, you know, sometime later on this afternoon. So we'll be able to take a few questions from you, but we'll have to leave so that we can do that. Thank you very, very much.
Sure. Okay, yes, at this time, I would like to thank all the panelists once again for their presentations. Let's hear it. Yes, they all volunteered to come with their busy schedules. Several of them, as I mentioned, have other engagements. Others had to reorganize their schedules so they could be here, and so we're very grateful for their presentations. At this time, we're open for questions from the audience that you may have, and remember that later I will announce to you the rooms for the workshops, and there are some of the workshop presenters here. I'd like to introduce them to you. We'll do that immediately after our question and answers period, and after this short period, we'll have lunch directly outside. Okay, thank you. All right, so questions? Yes. Okay. Yes. Yes, Ms. Arnold.
I don't know if I can repeat that, but it has to do with many of our young boys whose fathers don't want to know anything about them, that there's no trace of them, they don't want to be involved at all, and there certainly is a large group of them. And in this fashion, how can we then deal with them and provide positive role models for them? All right. That's not an easy question to answer, but I do know that I have in my own practice some that don't know their fathers. But we deal with that with the fact that, you know, your mother was involved with someone a long time ago, and this is what happened, and maybe he doesn't understand how much you love him. You know, you have to let them know that because you love him doesn't mean that he doesn't love you because he's missing or he's not involved with you. And those that don't know them, you could even elaborate a little bit and just say, you know, he really did not get a chance to know you like I know you, because I know that you'll be okay. But I think I'm a good role model for the young men that I go around with. I want them to see that they should take care of the bill when they get up. What's the bill? Have some money with them to be able to sit in a restaurant, take your cap off. You know, I don't have any problem about the caps and on the side and the sneakers and all like that, but I think that they ought to know when we go to sit down Come on. Come on. Yeah, he had his hand.
Dr. Whaley, I wonder if you'd mind some assistance. Could I just address the lady's concern?
You feel like?
Yes. As a help to all of us, as we know, many of our black males especially look down upon education. If you go to school, you're a punk. If you carry a book, you're a maricon. What we need, I feel, is more men in education, primarily at the elementary school level. I was a former elementary school teacher. I now work at Lehman College. And I worked in the barrios in Fort Apache in South Bronx. And if we had some more men in elementary school, and no, I have no qualms about anyone's sexual preference, and I teach that to my young students. Heterosexual, homosexual, male, female, lesbian, or homosexual. However, our young people need role models. I can throw a ball 25 feet. I can kick a football 300 feet. I have a family. I bring my children to school when I was teaching elementary school. We go to the Parents Association meetings in the evening. We don't hide. We are the mother. I am the father. I am the brother. I am the son. I am everything that the woman who might be a single parent may or may not need. And if we have more of our men, especially men, black and brown, who are not considered to be a punk or a faggot, I'm not talking about homosexual, or a faggot when you teach, then I think we'll be able to give you women more support with your children.
I would like to make a comment to the lady that spoke about the absentee of the father in the home. As a mother, and as a black mother also, and I have two sons, I feel that a lot of that responsibility lies on a lot of us as black mothers. We don't give positive information to our children about their fathers. What happens to a lot of our black males is that they're given a lot of negative. He's no good, you know, you don't need to know him. I'm the person that's responsible for you. And I feel that, you know, as a black mother, it's important for us to give them positive information. It doesn't matter what that man and you had together. It's more important that that child has something to look forward to or to think about. What I find also is that when you talk to a black male child, they have a lot of negative stuff they give back to you. My mother doesn't really care. She said, you know, that I don't need to know my father. You know, it's just you and I together. And I think that is so wrong. When my husband and I divorced, it was so important for me to keep the lines of communication open between him and his children. It didn't matter what he did to me or what we didn't have together. And I really believe that as black mothers, we need to give more input to our children about their fathers. As Dr. Vela said, it doesn't matter if that man is on the Bowery. Is it more important that that child something positive to know, oh, great, okay, so my mother and father didn't get on, it didn't work out, but that's still, you know, my father, and I'm going to be able to talk with him, but anything that I may be concerned about, I know I can go to him, and if I can go to him, at least I know where my father is, you know, what happened with him, what's taking place. That, I feel, is more important.
I'm a single parent, and my father also died when I was 12, so my mother basically raised us. I just wanted to make a comment because I think that psychology and education in this country has us in a trick bag because we spend a lot of our time trying to figure out who screwed up who. Who's the most to blame? Is it the black man? Is it the black female? We have debates. We've had them for the last 50 years, and they will continue unless we do something about what's going on in the society. I think this whole notion of father absence is created by rich white men who control these textbooks to cover over the fact that part of why men are absent in our families is because they ain't got jobs, and it's impossible to participate in the society in a well-meaning way. It also covers over the institutionalized racism. So I think that we need, you know, psychologists we are, and we're sort of focused on looking at how come individual stuff fails. But if we don't survive, if we don't become empowered as a collective, it don't matter, because we'll be whatever. The other point I wanted to make, I have as I said, a son, and my husband and I were separated. And I made the decision, because he made the decision that he didn't want to be there. I've been very open with my kids about who he is, on and on and on. And he has to take responsibility as an adult for what he does. So I have my son was in preschool, and he started acting out in a class that he had been in for 2 years. So the teacher called me up and said, you know, he won't stand in line, he won't do this, he won't do that. And I said to her, well, what's going on? So she said, well, where's his father? So I said, well, what business is that of yours? And she said, well, it must have something to do with his father. I said, lady, his father ain't been here for 3 years, and he was fine last year. What's going on in that classroom? What's going on in that school? And it turned out that there was a young black kid from Africa in the school that that Amani was friends with. And the teacher was so viciously and vilely racist, he didn't know how to talk about it. But when she got sent out of the room, he went with her. I said to her, and we fought for 4 weeks because I refused to talk to her about father absence. So we have to be really careful, because we use these labels and we spend hours, years, trying to figure out where are these people, what's going on. It don't mean a damn thing. We need some power in the society, and we'll have a great self-image.
On the point of power, empowerment, my question is really addressed to Dr. Fulani. Now, it has been my contention for a long time that most of our problem is caught up in the fact that we as a people have no power, no political power, no economic power, no whatever, as a group. I think that we, as a nation within a nation, where it may be good to go along with mainstream politics, I think that we need some sort of self-government. We need to organize ourselves whereby we can govern ourselves and dictate our own laws and our own justice. Some people may tend to agree because on a point of legality, it's not legal. But if we sit here and we talk about legality, then we are letting ourselves be governed by somebody else's value. So on this point, I really would like to put the question to Dr. Fulani. If this could not be a viable alternative, it's all well and good to have a rainbow coalition and all that, right, to go along with the mainstream politics. But I think as a people, we need to look around for a new alternative. And maybe the alternative is that our professionals and our businessmen could probably get together and start thinking about us being a nation within a nation and governing ourselves. Dr. Fulani.
I'll answer this briefly and invite you to the next rally I have on the New Alliance Party, and we can have a more prolonged dialogue. I basically am building a black-led, multiracial, pro-gay, independent third party because I think it is a new alternative to fight for the black agenda. I think that we've had many discussions, again, about the notion of self-determination, and I think the way that we have to fight and struggle for self-determination, be it political, personal, or psychological, is by virtue of the African American community participating in building those kinds of institutions and movements whereby we lead the society. We have to change America. We don't just have the responsibility, I believe, for the African American people because we don't live in a vacuum. We have it for the country. And I think that one of the contributions that we've made as a people is in our fights for democracy and for fairness. We've knocked down barriers, opened up doors for the society at large, and that's something that I am proud of. It's not something that I feel that has robbed from our humanity, I think it's something that has contributed to our being one of the more progressive peoples in this country. So I think self-determination is tied with leading not just African Americans, but leading the country, and I think we're bad enough to do that.
Good morning. I would like to ask one of the people here a question pertaining to myself. I have a very low, I have a very low self-esteem about myself and my culture, and I tend to like criticize my color skin, my hair, and everything, and I start envying other people. And I would like to find out what would be necessary, like either counseling or what books will be necessary for me to read to understand what I really am, what we really are, and somehow to relate to people in a positive way.
I think that we have to appreciate the courage of a person who will come up and put himself on the spot that way. And appreciating further the intimacy of his topic, I would suggest that he talks with the counseling department here in the school and let them advise him about what to do. I don't think it can be handled from the podium. My statement in jest would be to make that T-shirt you're wearing a reality. Did it say United States Marine Corps? Boy, if they don't straighten you out, you can't be straightened out.
Young brother, I'd like to invite you to come to the to 125th Street and 5th Avenue. I have a therapy practice there, and I work with some other very powerful therapists. But I also want, again, going back to the point that I'm making about this individual notion, self-esteem has a lot to do with the level of power that we have in this country. And I think we have to change those circumstances in whatever ways in our lives so that we can feel better about ourselves. A lot of times we feel badly about ourselves because what is going on in reality is bad for us. It's, you know, unfortunate, it's painful, it's humiliating. And I would love to give you support on working through some of that stuff. A lot of us walk around feeling badly about ourselves.
I'd like to address my question to Dr. Falani. Socialization, of course, empowerment starts with socialization. And I feel that it should start from very small. And I wanted to know if within your organization, if there's anything for the very youngster, the 5th grader, the 4th grader. My daughter ran a campaign at her school when you were running for president, and nobody knew who you were. But when she finished, everybody did, and they knew the platform, and it meant a lot. And she gained political empowerment at her school. And now she's anxious about that. She's looking into that. And I want to know if you could share with us at what level do we begin? And if there are organizations, I was hoping to ask the gentleman from the Urban League, if there were organizations that little ones could join so that they can come up with it, because we can't start at this level. We can't start at the top. We have to start when they're small and direct them and identify the problems, and so that we'll be pushing them in the right way to go.
All right, you should give your daughter my love. I agree 100%. First of all, I don't think it's ever too early. There are a lot of parents who believe that you should wait until your kids are old enough to, quote, handle these things before, for example, you talk to them about racism and the other isms in the society. But the reality is that our kids are impacted upon it by it as soon as they're in the world. And so you have to give them tools to deal with it to the degree that they can, because if you don't, they end up blaming themselves for actually problems that are much bigger than they. One of the things I was thinking about is when I had my kids, I was married, and my husband and I were into nationalism. And we were determined that we were going to make sure our kids had everything black. So they got black dolls, they got black cards. I mean, we attempted to recreate Africa in my living room. And this chick went to school. She was like 2 or 3. She went to preschool. In 1 week, she came home. She had this yellow sweater on her head, flinging it around, talking about her her blonde hair. So I said, this cannot be my child. And one of the things that, however, taught me that with all of the energy that you put into sort of recreating these things as good mothers or good fathers in your living room, this country is powerful. And if you really want to have an impact on how they feel about themselves and on self-esteem, you're going to have to combine what happens in your living room with changing some real stuff in the world. I'm working now with teenagers, and we just did a Youth Against Brutality workshop last week, a speak out, and the kids actually went out on the street and raised the issue of Donald Trump's calling for the penalty and pushing people to realize that they are the ones that they're talking about murdering. And that's, you know, for a whole nother effort. And I would love to have a group of younger kids, so you should come work with me and the New Alliance Party and help me build it. Thank you.
Okay, we'll have our final question now.
How's everybody? I'd first like to say I want to pat the brother on the back for getting up and speaking about his feelings towards his blackness, and I think it's very positive. First thing I'd like to say to everyone is that science is in most part statistics. They try to be conclusive, but it's not truly conclusive. The one thing that is definite is that there's nothing definite. This is why I'd like people to realize that sociology, psychology, and philosophy is speculation. It's speculation with a lot of evidence, a lot of facts, but it's still speculation. This morning I disagree with a few things Dr. Romana Whaley has said. Firstly, I noticed when she said that black men were immature, most of the women in the audience gave a round of applause. I think that black men have progressed tremendously from slavery. One of the things that is overlooked is that illegitimacy began during slavery, and for the most part, black men have progressed 1,000%. She also spoke on the black people rearing their children. Black people forgot how to rear their children during slavery. That's why, you know, we yell at our children because we want to keep them quiet for the slave masters. These are things that continue to go on. Also, black men are the main target in the society that we live in. We're the strength of the household. They have to separate us and defeat us. And black women, I'd like y'all to know that this is what's going on. This is what we suffer with every time we come out the house. Our manhood is constantly trying to be taken away from us on a daily basis. One of the things the doctor spoke on was that black men are immature. Again, I'll come back to that. I would like to ask her, what makes a mature man? Is it a spiritual growth or is it a carnal growth?
Yeah. Okay, first of all, I'd like to begin to put the question in a particular context. As I listened to Dr. Whaley and her use of black men as being immature, what I understood and what I think she was saying is that black men are socialized in an immature way, that they are trained to be immature in society, and that is not that there is something wrong about within a black man that makes him immature, but simply the way that he is treated in the early years within the home. If he doesn't have the responsibilities, if his sister has to do all the work, if his mother is doing all the work, and he is not given tasks to do, if he doesn't have to wash dishes, he doesn't have to clean the house, that takes away responsibility from him, so therefore he develops in an immature manner. And Dr. Wilson.
Yeah, you may have just really kind of just misinterpreted what I said, but I do feel that because we take a lot of time socializing our girls because, again, in most instances, the primary caretaker is the mother. Even in a two-family household, the primary caretaker all over the world, we know this, that in America, the primary caretaker is the mother. So it just tends, because the roles are because the sexes are the same, that we tend to socialize our girls a little bit more. And in our family, what happens is that boys don't get that same opportunity to be responsible, to do the things that women train up their daughters to do. And because sometimes people do say, well, I have friends today in 1989 who are young friends who say, you know, look, boys don't have to do that. That's women's work. They don't do dishes. They don't make